Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Friday morning keynote. My name's Gabe. I run the Saveitforparts YouTube channel, and I'm here to talk to you about intercepting satellite data with trash. This is something that's been pretty popular on my YouTube channel lately, so if you're interested in it, I've got some links there. Just a quick abstract. I'm going to be doing a very general overview of some of these satellite topics. I won't be getting into a ton of detail. If you're interested in more detail in any of the stuff that I talk about, it'll be on my website and on YouTube. I generally have a lot of this stuff in various videos. And then I've got links on the website as well for other people who might explain it better than I do. So we'll go over some of the basics of how to find free or cheap satellite equipment, how to modify it to do interesting things, and then what some of those interesting things are that you can do with that equipment. So, quick intro to myself. I grew up on an island in Alaska. My hometown was so small that my family's phone number was literally 3. And we had, we had a variety of satellite equipment for television and later for internet. And then a lot of radio equipment for general communication. We had a radio telephone. We had, one of the early Starband satellite internet systems that predates Starlink and all that. So I grew up with some of that equipment, and that is something that I've had kind of a lifelong interest in. My other hobbies, other than this, include everything from underground tunnels, boats, semi-professional hoarding. And the YouTube channel really started as an excuse to use some of the stuff that I tend to hoard. Not just hoard it, but actually do something with it, do projects, and give myself some motivation to finish projects by having a way to get it out there to other people and not just myself. So why did I get into satellites? Back during COVID, I picked up one of these newfangled SDR things. Some folks the other day gave a basic overview of software-defined radio, so I won't repeat that here, but SDR has a ton of sub-hobbies, sub-topics. There are many, many things you can do with it, and satellites are just cool. So SDR is also a lot cheaper and easier than your traditional ham radio. You might have a grandpa or an uncle or somebody who has thousands of dollars of old tube radios in their attic somewhere, and that is the traditional ham radio setup. I actually do have an amateur radio license. I've had one for over 20 years, but I am terrible at using it because I just don't have the space, the time, or the money for real equipment. And the barrier to entry for SDR is getting cheaper and easier all the time. You can set up a basic satellite ground station for under $100. Sorry, I'm getting used to my clicker here. So why dumpster diving, the other half of this? I grew up, like I said, off-grid. We didn't have stores that we could go to all the time. We didn't have much money, so anything that broke, anything that wore out, we tended to keep around, we tended to fix, repurpose, save for parts, and that's just something that's continued throughout my life. And I just hate seeing things go to waste. We're a very disposable culture, a very disposable society, and I think that's too bad. I think it's unfortunate that a lot of obsolete stuff goes into the trash, a lot of stuff that's slightly broken, slightly too old, just gets thrown out when it could still be completely useful. And then sometimes dumpster diving is the only way to obtain certain equipment. There are a lot of interesting satellite hardware that basically cost you, the taxpayers, hundreds of thousands of dollars originally when the government bought it or the military, and you can't really get that as a civilian. You can't afford it, you can't find it, unless you go to dumpsters, government surplus auctions, things like that, where you can get something that we've all paid for in our taxes. Now you can buy it for $1 at a government surplus auction. So, as many of you may know, disposal is often the most overlooked part of IT security. I'm sure all of us here know to forensically wipe our equipment before we throw it in the trash, but maybe not every department at your company knows that. Maybe the marketing department says we're upgrading all our computers, let's just throw all these computers in the back alley by the trash and everything will be fine. Let's leave it in the hallway, let's put it on Craigslist, let's sell it at an auction. Maybe it gets wiped, maybe it doesn't. So where do you find some of this interesting stuff? If you are a college student, or if you can pass as a college student, that is an excellent way to find stuff. Broke college students It is very acceptable, socially acceptable for broke college students or people who look like them to be found in dumpsters. It is even expected in some places. So college campuses throw out a lot of interesting stuff, and not just out back of the buildings. Sometimes professors, staff will just push stuff out in the hallway when it gets in their way in the lab, and they'll put a free sign on it. Basically, at most schools, it's kind of accepted that anything in the hallway is free, even if the administration doesn't think that way, but that's a great way to find stuff. Commercial and industrial parks are an interesting place to go dumpster diving. There are a bunch of very generic anonymous warehouses in various suburbs that have all kinds of interesting businesses who generate electronic stuff, refurbish it, resell it, and those can just be interesting dumpsters to go through. Demolition sites are a fun one. For example, there's an old abandoned Sears up by my work that has a whole bunch of satellite dishes on the roof, and I'm kind of waiting for the demolition equipment to come in, and I'll run over there and see if I can grab some of those antennas. TV, radio stations, ISPs, and phone companies are kind of a big one right now. In the old days, just a few years ago, a lot of these places would be getting their data from some kind of national affiliate, some kind of headquarters, and it would be coming down over a satellite connection. So television stations would be getting national content broadcast on back-end feeds over satellite. And then, of course, these days, a lot of that is on fiber optic. A lot of that is on broadband. So these television stations, radio stations, et cetera, have satellite dishes sitting around unused. And a lot of times you can just go up and ask them, do you have any satellite dishes you don't want anymore? And they'll be more than happy to have you take it down and haul it away versus them having to pay somebody to do that. Some of the wealthier suburbs around here have something called trash days or junk days, where folks put stuff out on the side of the road once a year for solid waste disposal. And the kind of the wealthier suburbs you get, the better stuff you get. People say, oh, my lawnmower didn't start this summer, out on the street. My computer's 6 months old, out on the street. I'm tired of this old satellite dish in the backyard. All kinds of interesting stuff gets thrown away that way. And some of these are more socially acceptable than others. There are some companies who don't like to find you in their dumpster. There are other companies who will say, hey, this is great, we've got some more stuff inside that we don't want to pay to dispose of it. So you get mixed reactions sometimes to being found in a dumpster, but other sources of hardware, if you are less interested or you have been kicked out of enough dumpsters, you might want to go out and see what you can purchase. So government surplus auctions are a fantastic way to recover the stuff that your tax dollars have already paid for. This was an example of something that probably cost a little more than $10 originally, but is now selling for $10. And obviously it's going to cost more to tear that down and move it somewhere, but it's a $10 satellite dish. That's a great deal, right? Don't overlook Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. Craigslist in the Twin Cities has become kind of landlords and car dealers, but Facebook is very ripe for what I call crackhead deals. The really interesting stuff that you don't know, how did some rando on Facebook come across this, and why are they selling it for $300 when it originally cost some government agency $15,000? And maybe you don't ask too many questions before you go pick this up. But there are some really interesting things that you can find on some of these marketplace websites. Likewise, corporate auctions. You don't get just government auctions, but you can get sites like KBid, ProxyBid. There are online auction aggregators which will do business liquidation sales. They'll do corporate surplus. A lot of bigger companies like 3M will do their own in-house surplus. So you get not only in-person sales, you also get online sales. I think somebody yesterday mentioned they go on to these auction sites and they just bid $5 on every lot, and then you don't know what you're going to end up with. So estate sales are a good one. You might think that estate sales are just grandma's china and furniture, but you can get some really interesting stuff from tradespeople, from people who worked in industry. And when those people retire, or they go, maybe they move into a retirement home, they pass away, their family often doesn't know what to do with all this stuff. They have really interesting special purpose tools. They have special purpose computer equipment, software, documentation, things that aren't really valuable to other people, so it gets sold at a garage sale, at an estate sale for almost nothing. University surplus, I missed that earlier. So when I was a student, like I said, kind of anything in a hallway was free, but nowadays they do send a lot of that stuff to a surplus department. The U of M has one called Reuse, which is not too far from here. And they are supposed to forensically wipe things and pull hard drives. They don't always do that, but you can find some interesting equipment there, satellite equipment, other electronics equipment, radio gear, test equipment, scientific equipment. Axeman Surplus is my favorite store in the Twin Cities. They are also right nearby here on University Avenue. They are, if you're not familiar with Axeman, they are a fantastic, just surplus, random stuff store. And everybody should go out there and just spend all day there if you can. It's great. Of course, eBay, and then you can DIY some stuff if you don't want to spend money or go dumpster diving. There are some DIY options for cheap or free satellite hardware. Other random dumpster and or auction finds that I've come across, I think I actually got this smartwatch at an auction and it still had somebody's Google Pay on it. So you can get wearable embedded devices, interesting stuff that may or may not have been cleaned up. Credit card terminals, somebody mentioned that the other day. Security cameras, sometimes with the memory cards and full of video. I've found networking gear with passwords. Sometimes there'll just be a sticky note with the password to somebody's entire network on a router that they've thrown out. Scientific equipment, phones, laptops. Elevator keys and building plans are an interesting one. This was maybe a one-time find. A few years back, I was out dumpster diving, as I do, came across a roll-off dumpster in front of somebody's house, and it turned out to be somebody who had passed away. They were an elevator mechanic, and their family had thrown everything they owned into this dumpster. So elevator keys, special purpose elevator programming equipment, software, documentation, blueprints of downtown high-rises, photo albums of mechanical rooms, of network closets, of just amazing stuff. And I probably could have filled my entire house with that just from that one dumpster, but I obviously couldn't fit it all in my car. But that's the kind of random and very interesting stuff you can find if you're really tuned into looking at trash, looking for opportunities for free stuff. Is you come across kind of once in a lifetime things like that. So what kind of satellite gear can you find? Very commonly you will find the rooftop KU band TV dishes, especially at those suburban junk days. You find those all the time. The small dishes like the one on the left there. They're not as useful for hobbyist level stuff if you can possibly find the big old C-band dishes, the big ugly 8-foot, 12-foot dishes that used to be in your yard in the 1980s. Those are much more flexible for hobbyist satellite stuff. Basically, the bigger the dish, the more signals you can collect, the narrower the focus, and generally just more things that you can do with those. Portable dishes, although they are much smaller, are also useful. Dishes that were on top of an RV, on top of a boat, little enclosed radome dishes. I'll talk about those a little bit later. There's some interesting things you can do with those guys. Uplink equipment, two-way satellite equipment, often has microwave transmitters built in, and you can do some interesting stuff with those. A lot of that requires an account of some sort, but you can find, like on old gas stations in the old days, every gas station in Minnesota would have a two-way satellite dish on the roof to handle like lotto tickets, and that was a specialized network. And now those are all on broadband, so those dishes are basically free for the asking. If you find the manager and they're in a good mood, they'll let you take down a two-way satellite dish and the modem and all the equipment and haul it out of their business. They don't want to deal with it anymore. This is kind of a ridiculous example, but I recently came across an 18-foot geodesic radar dome, and this was up in Canada at a former NATO base, which has been taken over by some radio astronomers, and they actually contacted me and said, hey, we have this dome, this extra one, sitting, taking up space in our situation. Do you want to come up to Canada and pick this up? And I said, yeah, that sounds perfectly reasonable. That is So I have that. Some of my friends here helped me set it up, and we're going to do some more things with that in the future. It's an ongoing project. DIY antennas. As I mentioned, if you don't have the money for surplus, if you don't have the time or the inclination to jump in the trash, you can build stuff. You can actually build an antenna probably just by going out to the tinfoil hat booth here. You can literally do the ET umbrella tinfoil, and this actually does work for weather satellites. You can also extend some of your DirecTV dish network dishes to make them a little bit bigger, a little bit more capable of different frequencies, with the addition of some kind of differently tuned feeds in the front. And on the bottom there, you can make some stuff that may or may not get you into trouble if the neighbors see you with that. But if you're looking at directional antennas, there's kind of a ridiculous example there as well. And so these are all kind of things that I've built out of essentially spare parts, a little bit of commercial equipment that's able to be modified. So once you have all of this treasure, cluttering up your garage, cluttering up your basement, annoying your family or significant other, what do you actually do with it? There are a number of sort of more normal uses that maybe the neighbors won't call the FBI for. If you're into television, there are free-to-air satellite TV signals, FTA satellite. You can buy an FTA set-top box online, and you can get free satellite TV. Usually, I consider it to be not very interesting. It's usually foreign sports, foreign religions, news channels funded by foreign governments. So I have not found too much interesting free television, but there are potentially some options out there. Normally you need a slightly bigger dish than the ones you'll find on your rooftop, but again, if you can find a slightly older dish or a slightly larger one, that opens up additional things that you can do with it. Ham radio is a big one. There are a number of amateur radio satellites that act as orbiting repeaters, and even if you're not an amateur, if you don't have a license, you can listen to these. You can listen to the International Space Station. They have a very powerful ham radio repeater. And these are a great way to get practice with the satellite hobby. They're a great way to get started with it. All you need is a cheap SDR, a cheap Baofeng radio. A directional antenna helps, but you don't necessarily need it. You can practice listening to these ham radio repeaters as a way to get used to how does a satellite orbit work? How do you aim your antenna at that passing satellite? How do you tune to the radio frequency? How do you adjust for Doppler shift? All of the little hoops to jump through that go into the satellite hobby can really easily be practiced this way before you start doing other stuff. And then weather satellite data is kind of another really common one that's really fun. You can get live data coming down from US government weather satellites, European weather satellites. You can get scientific data from various satellites. You can get aircraft tracking data, ship tracking data, messages to ships and aircraft. There are lots of interesting stuff out there being just broadcast down. If you have the right equipment, it's really fun. And like I said, I'm just touching on a lot of basics here, and there are many more topics that I'm not touching on. So this is a huge hobby that goes in a lot of different directions. If you're not into satellites at all and you just want to get your Wi-Fi to go 5 miles, well, you can do that with satellite dishes. The frequencies are similar enough, the hardware is similar enough that they make great directional antennas for Wi-Fi networks. And vice versa. I've made a couple satellite dishes out of directional point-to-point Wi-Fi dishes or 5 gigahertz dishes. So very flexible and cross-compatible. Then, of course, there's the less normal stuff, the stuff that might get you a visit depending on what you do with it. Communications, eavesdropping, encrypted stuff, and abusing military satellites, which I'll mention a little bit later here. And I do not recommend doing some of these things, but they are out there and it's interesting to learn about how other people do this. For most of the satellite hardware that you find, it's not going to work for something interesting right away. It's going to be tuned for television. It's going to be kind of single purpose. So you're going to have to modify it in most cases. This can include reprogramming motorized dishes for tracking. It can include 3D printing new antenna elements for different frequencies. A lot of the actual antenna element that receives the signal is called a feed, and that sits at the focal point of your dish, and that can be a variety of linear feeds, horizontal or vertical, similar to Wi-Fi. Circularly polarized feeds, a lot of satellites use a right-hand or left-hand circular polarization, so you need some kind of a helical or spiral feed. And you can just use basically a piece of wire for that, but it's handy to have a scaffolding of some sort, 3D printed or laser cut. You can modify GPS antennas into interesting stuff. The basic external magnet mount GPS antenna that you stick on top of your car that costs $5 down at Axeman Surplus or online. Those usually consist of a little patch antenna for L-band, low-end microwave frequency range. There's an amplifier circuit powered by your SDR, and then there will be a filter. And if you pop that filter out, you desolder it, now you have an L-band antenna that is covering a little bit wider frequency range, so you can listen to things that are a little more interesting than GPS. You can listen to search and rescue systems. You can listen to Iridium, Inmarsat satellites. And you can also buy amplifier filter modules, LNAs. Nuelec makes a bunch of these, the Sawbird series, and those are, they have a bunch of them for different satellite systems. So if you're into L-band, if you're into GOES satellites, if you're into radio astronomy, there are a bunch of different products that handle that. I mentioned briefly the motorized dishes. For low Earth orbit satellites, you want a azimuth elevation rotor, basically rotation and elevation. And most commercial dishes are just going to be looking at geostationary orbit. TV satellites all live in geostationary orbit. They sit in one place relative to us on the ground, so your dish doesn't really have to move much. If you have an RV, if you have a boat, then once you park for the night, all your dish has to do is rotate south, find that satellite, and you're watching football. For my purposes, since I don't like football, I like to modify these little dishes to track low Earth orbit satellites, which are usually come over about twice a day. You get about a 10 to 15 minute window in each orbit. And so you have to track that orbit pretty carefully to get a good signal from it, and basically run these motors in a way they're not intended to just continually track the low Earth orbit satellite. And you can do this with other equipment too. You can do pan-tilt security camera mounts for that. You can use old TV rotors, like the old style analog television antenna that had to be rotated around to face different TV stations back in the bad old days. Well, you can still find those rotors, and you can slap two of them together. You can do one horizontally for elevation. You can also completely DIY a pointing system with stepper motors, Arduino, Raspberry Pi. So if you want to just build this from scratch yourself, that is always an option. I tend to be more of a repurposed guy myself. I am not good at programming, and my Arduino wiring is always kind of a mess, and it's lucky if that works at all. So if I can repurpose something else rather than doing it from scratch, I tend to do that, but that's my own preference. And then if you are repurposing one of these existing commercial dish systems, there is very often some kind of interface under the hood, be it a factory port, a user programming port, some kind of interface of one form or another. Sometimes it's as simple as a USB port. Sometimes it's a weird RJ25 port that uses RS422, and you need a weird adapter. Like I've got this kind of mishmash of adapters going to, I believe this one is an RJ25 port under the hood. But if you don't want to mess with that, if you can't get into the firmware through one of these service ports, you can also do a complete brain transplant. You can pop in a Raspberry Pi, stepper motor hat, relays, and you can usually repurpose the existing motors in one of these dishes with your own controller. So, once you have found, built, modified all this stuff, what are some things that you can actually pull down from satellites? What is some interesting data? Weather satellites are a big one. This is usually an easy one to start with, especially the VHF weather satellites that use something called automatic picture transmission. This is kind of a legacy system. It's similar to WeatherFax or slow scan television, where it's using audio tones to transmit data. And so it's pretty easy to decode these. You can use a $20 Baofeng and you can just decode that audio with your phone. Or you can use a $15 SDR and decode it on your laptop with very simple open source software. There's a bunch of software out there that does everything from tracking, decoding, following orbits, running your rotors. I tend to use kind of a variety pack of software, but there are things like SatDump that will do all of it in one, and that's very capable software. So moving up a little bit in frequency range, I mentioned L-band. That's around 1.6, 1.7 gigahertz for most of these satellites. Low end of microwave frequency band. A little bit harder than VHF. You actually have to track the satellite. You have to aim your antenna at it through the pass, but not that much more difficult. And the hardware for this isn't too expensive. This is a 3D printed helicone antenna, which works really well for L-band. So this is just, you know, a dollar's worth of PLA, some metal window screen, and a little piece of copper wire here. This is mounted on an old television rotating dish, basically for an RV, but you can actually hand track this. It's lightweight. You can 3D print this with a handle, and you can just hold it over your head and track the satellite manually. So this is a great way to get started with things like the NOAA series. I mentioned VHF earlier. Unfortunately, those, like I said, are kind of obsolete, and we actually just lost one of the best VHF satellites, NOAA 18, so they are getting few and far between. There's still 2 US VHF satellites. There are a couple Russian ones, but if you want to get into this, this is a good time to do it while they are still there. S-band is kind of a step up from L-band. You might be familiar with a part of S-band because Wi-Fi lives in there. 2.4 gigahertz is in the S-band. A lot of satellites are in 2.2 gigahertz, so similar enough that they can use some Wi-Fi equipment, but you really do want a custom feed like the one here. This is another 3D printed helical feed for S-band, and just sitting at the focal point of a TV dish where your television LNB would usually live. And this is another rotating dish. This is another vehicle-mounted dish with azimuth elevation motors in it. And I have a Python program that interfaces with the firmware on this and tells it where to point versus originally it wants to just point south, find a television satellite. I'm kind of telling it on the fly, point at an azimuth elevation pair. And S-band is a little more challenging. The signals are a little bit fainter and they are washed out by other S-band interference like Wi-Fi. So there's a lot of ground-based interference. And unfortunately, there have not been a lot of filter amplifier combos for satellite S-band. There actually are, I'll talk about that in a minute. There is a company that just came out with one, but traditionally it's been harder to find the filtering equipment for this. One of the things that I like to look at on S-band is this military weather satellite. This is called the Defense Meteorological Satellite Program, I think, if I'm remembering the acronym. This one is really fun. There's kind of a story behind it. Back in the 1960s, 1970s, the US was really into looking at Russia for some reason, and we had a series of spy satellites, things like Keyhole, Corona. A lot of the early spy satellites would use film because that was the only way to get really good high-resolution pictures back in the 1960s. You didn't have digital cameras, you didn't have good electronic imagers. The DMSP satellites had electronic imaging, but they could only send down a very low-resolution picture. Like this is kind of the resolution you get. This is something like 1 pixel per mile. So you could see weather patterns with these early digital imagers. And what you would do so that you didn't waste your film is you would send the DMSP satellite over first in the orbit a little bit before the Keyhole satellite. DMSP would take a picture of Moscow. The CIA could say, okay, there's clouds, there's no clouds, do we want to take our picture or not? And then the Keyhole satellite would take that picture on film. Once the spy satellite got around to the US, they would eject that film in a reentry capsule. That film roll would parachute down and the CIA would fly by in a plane or a helicopter, scoop the parachute out of the air, rush that film back to headquarters to develop it. Yeah, this was a ridiculous system. Like, again, this was the 1960s. I think they were on a lot of interesting drugs at the time when they came up with this. Yeah, just a crazy method of getting photos back from orbit. Basically, a giant disposable camera that ejects the film roll. So DMSP is actually still around. The Keyhole satellites have all been replaced, of course, by digital spy satellites. But DMSP is still up there. The military does still use it for weather forecasting. There are only 2 left. There used to be about a dozen. Some of them have exploded. Some of them have just aged out. And DMSP is odd because it is encrypted for most of its orbit, but for some reason it decrypts over northern North America. About when it hits the Great Lakes region, it turns off the encryption. And nobody really knows why. At least I've never found a good explanation online. Nobody seems to know if this is intentional. Is it a glitch? Is it, do they still have complete control of these satellites or not? Nobody really seems to know, and the CIA won't tell me. So, but you can actually hear these satellites if you live in the US. If you live in northern North America, you can listen to these on S-band, and you can get Cold War style weather photos of the ground. So that's kind of cool. There are some modern satellites that use the same system. They appear to use the same encryption, but they don't turn the encryption off because maybe they haven't broken yet. So it's just, I find this one really fascinating just because it's got such an interesting Cold War history behind it. So here's an example of when I'm looking at specifically one of these DMSP satellites. This is kind of what my ground control or dashboard looks like. So over on the right, I have SDR++. I've got my SDR waterfall looking at the radio signal. In the middle there, I have a program called gPredict, which is ham radio software that grabs the orbital data of a satellite. And most of these satellites, the orbital data is out there publicly available because they don't really want to hide where it is because they want people to not launch satellites into conflicting orbits. So you can find the orbital elements of all these satellites, including some of the secret ones. So gPredict turns that orbital data into an azimuth and elevation pair. My Python code down here grabs that, passes it over to the firmware on my dish. And I like to have a security camera looking at my dish, even when I'm running this remotely. I'm remoting into the computer that actually runs the dish over here. But because my code is kind of bad, I'm a bad programmer, and because this dish was free on Facebook and was damaged when I got it, sometimes it does weird things. Sometimes it face plants right onto the roof. Sometimes it just starts spinning around for no reason. So I like to keep an eye on it with the security camera so I can kill the script if it starts doing something too stupid. On the lower left here, I have another window for into.io.com. That's a really cool website for looking up satellite tracking information, predicting passes, finding out when will a satellite be visible to me or radio audible to me. So you can kind of see that one shows the radio coverage footprint of that DMSP satellite. So all of this kind of goes together for a typical pass. A lot of this can be automated if you don't want to sit down and do this all manually. If the satellite is coming over at 3 a.m. and you don't want to do this manually, like I said, SatDump will automate a lot of this process. And I'll have links to all these websites that I'm mentioning on my website. I'll try to put that up again at the end, Saveitforparts.com. I'll have links to a lot of these references. Some other examples of stuff you can do. You can breathe new life into old technology. So here we have a Commodore 64 portable connecting to a BBS in my car over an Inmarsat modem. So this was a little bit of a ridiculous one, but this was a lot of fun. Inmarsat is one of these legacy systems from the 80s and 90s that used to provide internet and voice calls to ships at sea, to oil rigs, to government vehicles. It was designed kind of for a lower number of users. It was designed to be for very wealthy users, so it's very expensive. I think this was something like $100 for 5 megabytes, or like $10 a minute for voice calls, so not very affordable for the average user. But that also means now that Starlink and other competitors are coming along that the hardware for Inmarsat is basically free. People are ripping it out, they're replacing it with Starlink, they're throwing it on government auctions, they're throwing it on Craigslist. So you can get the actual Inmarsat modems for almost nothing. And then, of course, if you can find a SIM card, that's going to be where your money goes. But Iridium is a similar system in low Earth orbit. Inmarsat is a geostationary system. Iridium is another legacy system from the 80s and 90s that does phone calls, internet, but low Earth orbit constellation. Many fewer satellites than Starlink, so again, it's designed for fewer number of users, wealthy users. And because it's from the 80s and 90s, it is not very secure. This was basically an orbiting 2G cell phone tower, and 2G cell phones not very secure anymore. So It's pretty easy for small-time governments to listen in on Iridium phone calls. It's easy for random non-governmental groups to do so. It's easy, if not necessarily legal, for hobbyists to do so. And there are actually a lot of commercial products out there where you don't have to know anything about satellites. You can go and spend $10,000 on this all-in-one Iridium satellite interception system, and you can set that up and just hear a bunch of satellite phone calls. There is now some more hobbyist level gear for this. As I mentioned, you can hack a GPS antenna to get onto this frequency. And you can also now buy some stuff like the Discovery Dish. This was a Kickstarter recently. I think they're now available more publicly, but it was a Kickstarter for a while that gives you a reflector dish, and then you can do all these add-on feeds. So you can do your L-band satellite feed that basically these replace the center element for different frequencies. You can do S-band, so this is kind of the first commercial product that lets you see things like DMSP, like some of these other S-band satellites. And then you can get Inmarsat, Iridium. You can get radio astronomy feeds if you're more into the science end of it than the snooping end of it. And so basically, yeah, some of these legacy data and voice phone systems are open to pretty much anybody now. This is a legal gray area. You're not supposed to be intercepting or disclosing people's phone calls, even if it is kind of technically relatively easy to do. And the people who know that it's easy to do will actually employ some code phrases. So I have heard rumors that folks will use code phrases similar to Cold War spy movies when they're making Iridium phone calls. I don't know if those are people worried about corporate espionage, if those are government agents of our government or other governments. But it is kind of an interesting look into how some of these systems work these days. This is a fun example, something I call space piracy, but less of the anime swords and lasers space piracy and more pirate radio. So this was another government system from the 1970s where the US government, in their infinite wisdom, said, nobody has radios in the 250 to 300 megahertz range. We're going to use that for our communication satellites, and we're not going to put any access control on these. So we're just going to put up these satellites in geostationary orbit with a straight linear repeater. A bent pipe repeater is another word for it, where any radio signal coming in on, say, 300 megahertz gets transmitted back down to Earth at 250 megahertz or so. And this worked great for a while until some folks in Brazil realized that you can buy a marine VHF radio or an amateur radio around 150 megahertz. You can whip up a simple circuit called a frequency doubler, and you have a 300 megahertz radio. So a lot of these fleet SATCOM satellites, if you tune into one now, you will not hear government traffic, or at least not unencrypted government traffic, but you will hear all kinds of Brazilian Portuguese. You will hear Brazilian truckers, loggers, miners. If you're over in Europe on the satellites, the fleet SATCOM satellites that cover Europe, you will hear techno radio stations, you will hear government propaganda from Russia, you will hear hunters, fishermen, folks in Eastern European countries. If you try this in the US, you will get a visit pretty quickly, or so I've heard. I have not had a visit myself, but I have heard rumors of US use and various shenanigans. Because there are multiple satellites in this Fleet SATCOM series, they can pretty easily pinpoint where a transmission is coming from. They can triangulate a ground position. If you're in a third world country, if you're in a country without a lot of law enforcement cooperation with the US, well, people get away with this. And again, very popular in Brazil, very popular in Russia, pretty popular in parts of Europe. If you're not in Europe, you can listen into these on some web SDRs, which is something I haven't covered, but it's basically folks will live stream their software-defined radios on the internet, and so you can listen to radio traffic around the world that way. Another one that I won't get into too much, satellite internet. In the old days, this was maybe a little more ripe for abuse before everyone was kind of pushed into encryption, HTTPS, all that. Satellite internet works basically by when you have two-way satellite internet, your ground dish, your HughesNet, Starband, whatever, will transmit your request up to the satellite. That goes down through their network operations and whatnot. Your response comes back to the satellite and it gets broadcast back down. And the operating word is broadcast. It gets sent down to basically everyone with a HughesNet dish in that service area. There are some differences between wide beams and spot beams, but basically any of your neighbors with a HughesNet dish will get your HughesNet traffic, and that gets MAC filtered. But if you put your modem into promiscuous mode, you could basically see everybody's traffic. This is, again, there's no encryption by default. It's up to the end user if you're using the correct protocols, if you're using modern protocols. Some people still aren't. There are still old email protocols that aren't very secure that still get used on these. There are also some older protocols on certain satellite systems that were just shoehorned on top of existing video transport protocols because companies want to still keep using these old satellites that might still be around from the 90s that cost $1 million to launch it, and they want to still get some money out of that. So they've put internet on top of older stuff that is maybe not the most secure. There are also opportunities for DOS attacks. If you have one of these dishes, again, this is one from an old gas station that used to run the Minnesota Lottery, and it's got this big microwave transmitter on here. And if you are not very careful about aiming that transmitter, you can unintentionally or intentionally jam a satellite because you're overpowering the input. You're basically transmitting to an orbital slot that you're not supposed to be. Back when I lived in Alaska, they were very careful to tell us where and how to point our internet dish so that we didn't accidentally point it somewhere we weren't supposed to. A quick example here, these are some of those smaller rooftop RV camping dishes that I talked about that have little motors inside. Yes, I have a problem. I have too many of these. One thing that's really fun with these is you can use them to generate radio heat maps. You can make a microwave image of the radio environment. So you basically run your XY motor system, you record the signal strength at each XY position, and you've got a heat map of the sky. So this is geostationary orbit. Each of these little blobs is a TV satellite. I get a little bit of lens flare because the smaller the dish goes, the wider the focal area. And so you actually see more than 1 degree of sky when you do this. So yeah, you get a little bit of distortion with that. But it's a really cool way to see what does geostationary orbit look like from here in the Midwest or wherever you happen to be running a scan like this. So I've written Python code to do this with a number of those little dishes. There's a couple different, oops, I went back too far. There's a couple different brands. Tailgater is an easy one to find. WineGuard is another one. I try to pay like $50 or less for these, so if you're looking for these, don't pay too much, don't overpay. You can get these for free sometimes because people are getting rid of them. And somebody has expanded on my code to do animation, basically a continuous scan that then can be turned into a time lapse of what is actually going on in geostationary orbit. So you see not only the satellites here, you see the sun zipping across the sky. He'll come by in a minute here. So the sun is an emitter of radio waves. All of this matrix rain up at the top here, I think, is Starlink interference. Starlink uses the KU band for some of their beaconing, so and they're low Earth orbit, so they're coming over basically faster than the dish can scan. So they just show up as a few pixels here, and it's vertical because the dish is incrementing vertically and then horizontally. You also, if you look closely, you can see some satellites moving up and down here, like that guy. These are geosynchronous but not geostationary satellites. So they are in an inclined orbit, and those are basically to serve high latitudes like northern Alaska that don't have a good view of geostationary orbit otherwise. So again, this is just a really cool way to see what does orbit look like? What do satellites look like on the radio spectrum? I think it's really fun. You can also use the same technique for Wi-Fi heat mapping. KU band gets some harmonics of 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, so Wi-Fi will show up on these same little dishes even when I'm still using KU band receivers. So you can see what a hotspot looks like in visible light and from one of my little scanners. And this is a great way to confuse hotel staff when you're running this on the road. So I don't think I don't know if we're invited back to that hotel. But yeah, those are some of the interesting things that I've worked on, that I've done on various videos. There are, like I said, there are many other satellite applications. There are many things I didn't discuss here. So briefly, a couple other ones. Some people might be familiar with the old Skygrabber software. As I mentioned earlier, that was a way to get your neighbor's satellite internet data. And it's less useful, of course, today, but in the old days, before everything was encrypted, Skygrabber, you could set that up to, you'd want to filter normally. Like if you're getting everybody's satellite internet in the 90s, your computer probably can't handle that much bandwidth. Your network card can't handle that. But your modem can, and it's just filtering by the MAC address. But if you want to stop filtering and filter by, say, I want everybody's images, I want everybody's MP3s, that was something that went on for a while. Maybe it still goes on. I wouldn't know. But there's some other services that are kind of interesting. Blockstream is one that basically transmits down the entire Bitcoin blockchain over a one-way satellite connection. And this apparently has applications if you're doing crypto off-grid. There are some other one-way data casting services that send down basically one-way IP streams, one-way satellite internet. OtherNet was one that just shut down recently, which was kind of designed to send you Wikipedia updates from space, and you didn't even have to have an internet connection. You would just set up a dish, you'd set up a server, and it would just collect all of the new Wikipedia updates. Tuche, which I'm probably mispronouncing, is a similar one that operates in the Middle East, which is designed to kind of get around firewalls, get around government censorship, and send people Wikipedia, send them Western news, things like that. There is a sub-hobby called searching for wild feeds. This is normally, it's another branch of free satellite television. So networks will send down kind of back-end feeds to their affiliate stations of national sports, national news. If there's live news going on, a lot of this stuff gets sent out kind of uncensored, commercial-free, over these unlisted satellite systems, unlisted transponders on TV satellites. And if you have the right equipment, if you have the patience to sit around and listen for these, try to find out what transponders they're using, you can get all kinds of interesting television stuff that way. And that this is a whole sub-hobby. Like I said, if that's something you're interested in, you can find all kinds of communities for that online. I've been just starting to get into radio astronomy. That's something that is interesting to me. And then I've recently started looking at so-called zombie satellites. These are satellites that have failed, shut down, been retired for some reason, and then started working again for some reason. So they can be interesting, although there's normally not a lot of interesting data coming down on those. But they're just kind of an interesting subcategory of this hobby. I'm almost done here. I know we're getting close to the end, and I wanted to leave time for some questions. What are my future plans? I mentioned that radar dome. I'm still working on building that out. We're going to put a big C-band satellite dish in there and use that for some radio astronomy, use that for some other satellite stuff. I would like to get into X-band. That is kind of the next step up from S-band. It is a little more expensive, a little more difficult to do. There's less consumer-level hardware for X-band out there, and so that's something that I have not quite figured out yet, so that's going to be a future project. There's a lot more stuff on X-band. There's a lot more scientific data, a lot more NASA stuff. There's a lot more interesting stuff up there if you have the equipment to listen to it. I've had some weird job offers. Military contractors and whatnot tend to think I'd be a good employee for some reason, but I think I'm going to continue with my YouTube nonsense for now. I do still have a day job, but I'm working more on the YouTube side of things, so that's more my speed. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, I will, I'll try to put up the links again to my website if people are interested, but yeah, I can answer a few questions here. I think we have about 10 minutes still, so. Any questions? Sure. So the question was, did the YouTube channel take off, or did it do more than I expected? I think that was the question. Yeah. Yeah. So I never set out to become a influencer, YouTuber, whatever. Like I said, I basically started the YouTube channel as an excuse to use my hoarded junk. Because if you're using the stuff, you're not a hoarder. You're a professional now. Yeah, it took off more than I expected. I didn't start with satellite stuff. My YouTube channel started more with other projects, DIY boats. We built some little rail cars for abandoned railroads. I have one of the zoo monorail trains from the Minnesota Zoo. Dig hobby tunnels. I do a bunch of different random stuff, and really the satellite stuff is what took off. So I guess if you're going to start a YouTube channel, what I would say is do everything. Do anything and everything that you're interested in, and one of those things might get popular. Maybe the other things won't get popular. At least that's been my experience. Is there are certain topics on YouTube that I think are really cool, but the algorithm doesn't care, or people don't care. And there are other topics that I think are, why are people watching my videos? Because I don't consider myself an expert, but suddenly my video has gone viral because of mysterious YouTube reasons. So yeah, if you want to start a YouTube channel, I would say maybe keep your expectations low or reserved, but maybe have your hopes high and just see what happens. Keep your mind open. If something does take off, maybe you have to pivot to that topic. I wouldn't say I've pivoted 100% to satellite content, because I still do stupid boats and tunnels and whatnot, but those don't make as much ad revenue, and those don't get as many views. So the satellite stuff has really been what's gotten popular. Yeah. Sure. Loosely, yeah. Yeah, so the question was, if I find something at an auction and I don't know what it is, how do I figure out what it is? And this is one of my favorite things, is I will go to auctions, I will go to Axeman, and I will just say, I don't know what this is, but it's $5, so I'm taking it home. And what is my process to figure that out? So, of course, Google is always good. Google any numbers, every number you can find on it, serial numbers, model numbers. Open it up, see what the boards are inside, see if there are any numbers on those. The FCC has a great database of teardowns, of regulatory stuff, so if you can find any numbers at all, you can go on the FCC database and find any documentation that they've done on this, manuals, teardown photos. I'll crowdsource stuff sometimes. I will go out on forums. There are a bunch of satellite hobbyist forums, space hobbyist forums, Reddit and whatnot. I'll post pictures and say, what is this? Google image search is great. I see all the time, like on Reddit, people will say, well, what's this boat? What's this computer? What's this satellite? And you could take that picture, pop it into Google image search, and you'll immediately get a match, usually. So those are good ways. And then I've got a Discord channel where I will ask people if they've seen something like this before, if they know what it is. Sometimes I'll just post a video. I'll say, I don't know what this is. Here's my teardown of it. Here's what I think it is. And I will get a reply from the guy who developed it or somebody who worked on it. So that's kind of fun. They can't always tell me all the details because they signed an NDA or something, but a lot of times I will get insider information that way because somebody is just excited that I have found their obscure device that they made in the 1970s and they want the world to know more about it. So, any other questions? Yeah. As far as satellites or? Aircraft, that's an interesting one recently. I did a video on I think it was it turned out to be the DEA doing a spy plane orbit of the Twin Cities. They have these Cessnas with camera pods all over them, and that one was interesting. Like I said, I grew up on an island. We had bush planes around. I've kind of learned to identify different planes, and one of these was circling around St. Paul, and I got some video of it, and yeah, it's a spy plane, and made a quick video about that, and it was really amazing the number of comments on that YouTube video of, either A, these don't exist, our government would never do that, okay? I even posted some articles where they interviewed the FBI and the DEA, and they said, yes, we absolutely do that, and we have stingrays on there. And then the other kind of 40% of the comments was, yeah, these follow me to the bathroom all the time. It's like, okay. Okay, so very mixed reviews on that one, but yeah, as far as satellites, I'd say the DMSP is one of my favorites just because it's a military satellite, it's weird. I know there's other stuff out there that's probably more interesting and weirder, but I maybe haven't gotten there yet, so. Yeah. That's something I usually stay away from, especially on YouTube, just because it's not a good idea to put some of that stuff on a public video. I have not become a popular enough YouTube influencer or whatever to have the FBI visit that some other big name YouTubers tend to get when they get to a certain size and they get to a certain topic. So I've been fortunate in that way, but yeah, I try to avoid that. I try to just do stuff that is not a gray area, or if I discuss it, I try not to give too many details because, you know, I try to stay within the law and all that. So I had to get a drone license recently because if you're flying a drone for YouTube, it turns out the FAA can come after you if they have spare time. So yeah, it's considered a commercial purpose once you're filming with your drone for YouTube. Yeah, I think we're, oh, one more, sorry. As far as equipment? Or? Oh boy. I have to be careful with, people offer me stuff sometimes, and I have to be careful not to hoard other people's junk drawers because my junk drawer is already full. So I do, and I have a really hard time turning that down. If somebody comes to me and says, yeah, I have this Inmarsat modem that I'm not using, do you want it? It's like, you know, yes, but I don't know that I can't think of anything offhand that I'm desperately looking for aside from X-band satellite stuff. If you have access to an X-band receiver system, I'm looking for that, I guess. But yeah, I guess that. I know we're getting close to 11 here. I'm sure there's somebody coming up next. So if there are no other questions, I will get out of the way here. Thank you, everybody.